Welcome to the CIH podcast. I'm Liam Turner, your host for today's episode. And as it's Mental Health Awareness Week, we're going to be exploring resilience in the housing sector and what it means for housing professionals working across front-facing services and leadership roles. I'm joined by Julie Haydon, President of CIH and Director of Corporate and Neighbourhood Services at Wolverhampton Homes. Julie will, of course, be talking about her incredibly timely and significant presidential campaign rooted in resilience, which is helping housing professionals to protect their mental health and well-being in a sector that really is at the moment, I would say, defined by constant change. Also joining me and ready to share their insights into this important topic is Linzi Webb, Senior Housing Officer for ASB Intervention and Prevention at Radius Housing, which is a housing association that operates primarily in Northern Ireland, and Niamh Quinn, ASB Team Lead at Tuath Housing, an approved housing body operating in the Republic of Ireland. So thank you all for joining me today. It's great to have you all here. Julie, if I could just start with you, could you tell us a bit about your campaign and why you decided to put resilience at the heart of it?
Thank you, Liam. Of course. So the presidential campaign rooted in resilience was really created because, as you've mentioned, resilience in housing is no longer a nice to have. It's very much an essential. We see across the sector, professionals are working through increased regulation, rising expectations, emotionally demanding situations and constant change, while still showing enormous compassion and commitments to our tenants and communities. I wanted this campaign really to focus on helping people move from that simply surviving mindset to a genuinely thriving mindset. And the campaign is rooted in the idea that well-being, growth mindset, and also professional resilience should sit at the heart of housing culture and leadership. It's very much about creating space for honest conversations, sharing practical tools, and making sure that people feel supported in the work that they do every day, but also about recognising the emotional labour in housing and making sure that looking after ourselves and each other becomes part of our culture and not an afterthought. It was also really important for me because mental health is deeply personal. And in my presidential address, I spoke about seeing resilience within my own family as I was growing up, but also recognising that silence and coping harder are not always the answer. Asking for help is very much a strength.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about what resilience kind of means in housing today, yeah, what does it mean to you personally, Julie?
So for me, I would say, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, resilience was kind of understood more as an individual trait, and probably that ability to cope, I would say, to stay calm under pressure, keep going under difficult circumstances. And in housing, I feel that often translated into something more where people were carrying quite a heavy emotional and operational burden. For me, resilience today is very much more increasingly understood as something that's way more broader than that and more collective. And really, we recognise now that resilience is not just about endurance, and it's not about absorbing, unlimited pressure without any consequence. I think we've seen since the pandemic the cost of living pressures, rising homelessness, increasing complexity, our feel of tenant needs, safeguarding concerns, social media scrutiny, and that workforce fatigue, I think, have all contributed to changing that conversation. And it's therefore more about resilience being more organisational, not just individual, about recovery, not just enduring situations, and also linked, I think, to the psychological safety and culture of organisations. I think in many ways, I guess to summarise, I think the conversation's matured more, and we talk less now about people toughening up or manning up. You hear a lot, don't you? But more about creating environments where people can continue to do difficult work, but in a sustainable way.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to bring yourselves in, Lindsay and Niamh, same question to you guys. But when we think about resilience in housing, what does that mean to each of you?
Yeah, so like Julie said, I think resilience is often seen as like a toughening it out. But for me, it feels more about staying grounded while everything around things feels so chaotic. Especially in the jobs that Lindsay and I do, you're dealing with people's lives at their most stressful. So pressure definitely comes with the territory. But I think resilience is about accepting that you're not unaffected by that, but it's how you respond to it, how you keep your own judgment, your own perspective, and keep a hold of what's important, your sense of self. And then understanding that you're not supposed to do it all on your own. You're not meant to carry that whole burden on your own. And the strongest teams that I've worked in is the ones where people can say, oh, that was a really tough day. And then we can chat about it and then leave it there if we can. So for me, resilience is about adapting. It's also about balance and staying human and knowing when to lean on others to ask for help.
Yeah, and Lindsay?
Yeah, I would agree. And I suppose for me, resilience is not just about coping with the challenging situations. It's about feeling supported and equipped to be able to do your work over a long period of time. And in my role, I feel that resilience is, it's a strong foundation for understand and really clear understanding of what my role is and what my role isn't. And that's important as well, to understand what you're not responsible for. And this clarity helps me make really clear decisions and maintain appropriate professional boundaries, which are essential when dealing with those more complex, high-pressure cases. So while resilience is often described as our ability to adapt and cope, in practice it's something that's both personal and organisational, and we really do need clear boundaries and strong support systems and a healthy working culture to allow us to be able to do our job effectively.
Yeah, and you both touched on your kind of your everyday work there. But I was wondering if you could each kind of talk about your own experiences of being resilient kind of in your day-to-day roles, especially with kind of the whole ASB side of things.
So when I think about a case where that really helps me build on my resilience and remind myself of who I am. It's a case that I dealt with a young man called John. So John was in addiction. He was a perpetrator of violence. He was under threat from paramilitaries, and it was such a challenging case to deal with. He was really violent, and I had watched him attack people in communal areas. I'd watched him be attacked by mass men. And in the midst of all of that, I was trying to manage the impact that John's behaviour was having on everyone else in the apartment block. There were older people living there, people with young families, and very vulnerable people. And it was a really difficult situation to manage. We ended up at the stage where we were serving the notice, and I suppose this is the part that really struck me. So as I was getting out of the car, a woman came towards me and introduced herself. She was John's mummy, and she was shaking. And I said to her, oh God, this is so sad. I'm so sorry that you're having to deal with this. And she said, he's my son and I'm his mummy and I have to be here. And that really struck me, because up until that point, it was hard for me to understand that John was somebody's son, and that woman had held him in her arms, and fed him his bottle and put him to bed at night. And she loved him and cared for him. And even though he had perpetrated such terrible violence and caused so much upset, she still loved him and she wanted to be there for him. And I find that really hard. I'm a mummy, I have 3 boys, and you know, she said to me that she couldn't understand what had happened with John. And that really struck me, you know, as being a mum and having the 3 boys myself. And she said to me, he was so loved and cared for. He never wanted for anything. And one day he literally turned right instead of turning left. And that was that, and she couldn't pull him back. And unfortunately, John actually died 2 months after the notice was served. And I'll be honest, he was one of the cases that's really stayed with me, because he showed me that those cases can have such a massive ripple effect, and it can affect so many people. It can affect John and his mum and their family, the people that lived in that block, and me. It really affected me. And as difficult as that situation was, I still had the responsibility to protect the whole community, all the children that were living there, those older tenants. Balancing that with the empathy for John and his mum was incredibly challenging, and it really pushed me emotionally and professionally in ways I had never experienced before. So that case really tested my resilience, because I had to keep showing up. I had to keep making decisions under pressure and carrying the emotional weight of what I was witnessing while still acting fairly and safely and in line with my role. It taught me the importance of maintaining those boundaries, using the support system around me, and reflecting on my practice to make sure that I did my job effectively. But ultimately, I suppose, and this is the reason why I think of this case, it really strengthened my resilience, because it showed me that even in those really complex and heartbreaking situations, I can remain compassionate while still making really difficult decisions. It reminded me why resilience isn't about becoming hardened. It's about continuing to care while still knowing that you carry that care in a more sustainable way. And I'll be honest, John stays with me every day. I have to make a difficult decision. And I know it sounds strange, but I can nearly picture him standing beside me. Because his case reminded me that to always try and see the light, even when things are very, very dark. And sometimes in the job that Linzi and I are doing, it can be dark. And he always challenges me to find the light. So that's the case I always think of when I'm thinking about my resilience and what tested my resilience as well.
Yeah. That, I mean, it's just one of those things where I guess from what you're saying, it's obviously very difficult when it happens at the time, but as you say, like that case sticks with you, John sticks with you, and in the long run, I guess it's helped you, and I guess serves as a reminder of why you do what you do, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Linzi, just wondered if you had any kind of experiences you'd like to share.
I suppose for me, my resilience has evolved since I started in housing. And I think that naturally happens as you gain experience along the way. But at the beginning of my career, there were a number of moments that really tested my resilience. And they're the moments you would imagine, you know, high conflicts, stressful situations that most people would struggle with. But there was one period of time when I lost 3 customers to suicide in a very short period. And I found that incredibly challenging, because again, you had to show up, you had to support the families through that, and you had developed relationships with these people, and those families still stay with me to this day, and I often think about that. But in response to those experiences, I made a conscious decision to invest in my own development. I undertook training in things like trauma-informed practice, restorative practice, mediation, and that learning has given me invaluable experience and skills to help me navigate those more complex situations. And it doesn't mean that they're easy. It just means that I'm able to reduce the risk of having vicarious trauma and bringing those things home with me. So now, while those high conflict situations, I can usually manage without much issue. Interestingly, the things that test my resilience today are those cases where you have high level of communication with tenants, unrealistic expectations, and in my role, when I recognise that maybe an officer needs a space from that type of communication, I would take a lot of those cases on, and it's not that I find them easier, but I have a really structured approach in how I deal with those, and I set really clear boundaries with those customers so that they know what to expect from me and what level of communication they're going to get. But I am only human, and often it does test my resilience, and I know that I can go to my manager and say, I need a space from this, because it's important that we ask for help when we need it, because it means that we're continuing to deliver a good service for people as well. So I think that shows that resilience isn't fixed. What would have caused me maybe stress at the beginning of my career doesn't now, because I've put the steps in place to make sure I could eat those things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And from what you're both saying, I mean, resilience partly it's down to kind of your what you do to support yourself, but it sounds like both of you as well, you kind of had wider support to help you kind of develop and grow and kind of well to overall develop your resilience and how you deal with these kind of instances. So I guess my follow-up question then to what you guys are both saying was, what does that genuinely supportive team environment look like? In terms of like the wider organization, what does a supportive housing organization look like in terms of helping you to build up your resilience? I don't know which one of you wants to take that one on first, or maybe Julie, if you'd had something to add to that, maybe you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, I think there's a real passion in what you hear Linzi and Niamh talk about, and certainly when we're talking about resilience, it is a very personal thing, but also there's an element of that organisational support as well, and I think that's really important. I think for many housing professionals, I guess the real challenge comes when you're kind of balancing competing pressures, so supporting vulnerable residents who may be in crisis, managing increasing caseloads. We've seen a lot of that, and also handling kind of conflict and complaints and situations where colleagues are supporting tenants and residents that are facing trauma, domestic abuse. And I guess what tests resilience almost is not so much just the workload, but the emotional weight of wanting to help people sometimes more than the system allows. And I think one of the, I talk about the toolkit, and kind of when I've done some of the presentations at recent conferences, there's an ask of all of those leaders there really to ensure that resilience is on the agenda. It's talked about at a strategic level. There are opportunities for those honest leadership conversations and permission to say, if things are difficult, using the processes such as reflective supervision. And certainly you kind of see resilience, I guess, grow at its strongest almost when people feel they're not carrying the pressure alone. I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Linzi, Niamh, did you have anything to add to that in terms of the importance of a kind of a wider supportive team environment?
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, and some of the best times of my career have been when it's been really challenging, and you think back on that, and that's because of the team that you've been in, support that you've had, the work that you're doing, but it's the right thing, and it's valued within the organisation. And there's been many of those moments, and you get through them because of the support that's in place for you. So I know we've said that resilience isn't just personal. I think it's important that you take responsibility for your own resilience, and that you have a plan, and that you reflect on those challenging situations, both good and bad. But it's also for the organisation to take responsibility for that too. And a big part of that for me comes down about having a good manager who really gets to know their team, builds connection across their team, creates safe spaces where people can share challenging situations or where they're just needing a bit of space, and that there's no judgment from that. And in my career, whenever I've had to deal with those really difficult situations, and even I often say we could write out, and it's been okay because of that. You know, when you go back to base, people have your back. You know you've got a plan, and you know that you're doing all of the things that you're doing for the right reasons. So hopefully that answers your question. But I think it's all about that connection piece, the team you're in, and that also that your manager really gets to know you and knows your triggers, because sometimes those high functioning members of your team who are really resilient will very often never show that they're struggling. And it's about getting to know them personally so that you can identify when they maybe need that break or a bit of space.
Yeah. And I think it's about, like, you can have all the greatest slogans in the world, but like, what does it actually mean on a wet Tuesday afternoon when everything's kicking off? Like, when are the people going to turn up and be there for you? So, like, I have to say, I'm very, very lucky into it. It's a great culture there, and it's a very open space. Our team only set up last July, so we had a chance to really set how we wanted it to go forward, and it was all about not being, not manning up, like not trying to look like the strongest person in the room. It's about saying, oh, I find that difficult. I find that interaction really, really challenging. So I think that's like where it's genuine, and you know that that person actually has your back and will be there for you. So like team meetings where it's open, that people can talk and contribute, that they can say when things were difficult. I think that really helps. Reflective practice as well. And we're trying to embed that into our supervision system, so that people feel like they can really, in an open space, talk about how they felt about the issues that they're having. And like Lindsay said, like, knowing that I don't have to explain myself to my manager, that I can say, listen, I'm going to need 10 or 15 minutes, or I might need an afternoon after some of the things that you're dealing with. Because if you can't take a moment and just breathe and deal with what you just witnessed or experienced, you know, you won't be ready for the next customer that comes along. You won't be able to provide a good service to them because you're still living in that moment from, you know, the last thing that you dealt with. So it is a good culture into around that, and I'm really glad of it, because it means that I feel so well equipped to go into the next day and be ready for the next challenge that comes ahead. Because like Lindsay has said, you know, dealing the job we're dealing with, it's wall to wall chaos most every day. You know, you're dealing with antisocial behaviour from 9 until 5 every day, you know, so it can be a lot, and you really need to have those systems in place to look after you.
Yeah, Julie?
I think it's a really important note that you've made, just in relation to, I guess, thinking about the conduct and competence standard coming in, and not only the qualification, but also around the behaviour and the culture and the leadership element of it. And if you think, you know, other professions and other professionals have, for example, that clinical supervision, and that's something that doesn't really exist in the world of housing management, but maybe that's something that we do need to think about going forward, because there's no doubt about it, we are dealing with a very different world to what we were even 5 years ago, I guess. And, you know, for people that are coming into the rented housing market, particularly through, you know, the social housing, the requirements are very different now to when my mum and dad had their council house that many years ago. And so I think there's a real push in terms of that supervision, you know, proper professional supervision, and certainly something that we talk about in the CIH as well as being necessary and a real need in terms of the conduct and competence standard.
Yeah. No, you all touched on a couple of crucial points there. I think one is leadership and one is culture. I think those two are essential to, you know, building up a kind of a truly resilient I guess, housing workforce that can, continue to deliver for residents at the end of the day. But Julie, you mentioned a few minutes ago your toolkit, which I believe I kind of lost track of time, but I believe it launched a month or two ago.
It did.
Yeah, so
It
I
did.
just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about the toolkit and how it's helping housing professionals and their organisations to kind of support resilience and their mental health.
Yeah, thank you, Liam. I'm so pleased that the toolkit is available, and it was designed to be really practical and accessible, whether you're in a frontline role, a leadership position, just starting in your career. And we had support from CIH Futures in terms of what young people might want to see from that toolkit. So some interesting thoughts around that. But we've included resources around things like self-care, reflective practice, much of what we've talked about today, and also building psychologically safe teams, as well as having guidance on difficult conversations, and particularly where we are dealing with tenants or residents that may be experiencing distress or be in crisis. So some of the resources include a team culture and resilience checklist, really to help and support managers and teams to reflect on whether people feel supported, and if they do feel psychologically safe and connected. There's also a wellbeing and mental resilience mini guide with some practical everyday strategies that people can use during those more kind of challenging periods. Really interesting reflection workbook, which encourages individuals to, I guess, just to pause, reflect a little bit, and recognise both the challenges but also the achievements, because we talk a lot about the challenges, but it's been such an amazing part of the presidential campaign just to see so many housing professionals who do fantastic work every day, and I think it's important to recognise those achievements as well. And then also some mindfulness and kind of grounding activities, I guess, that you can use throughout your working day to reduce some of the stress and refocus on that. But what's really important for me is that these resources are designed for immediate use, so they're not theoretical documents that sit on a shelf. They're really practical tools that people can use, embed into the team meetings, those supervisional one-to-one sessions, leadership development, and even daily routines. What's also been really positive, Liam, is that there's a strong focus around mental health awareness and suicide prevention. And we've talked about that on the podcast today, really where we can align any emerging best practice that's coming through, and standards across the sector, because it's really important, because many of us are encountering these situations more and more frequently, and there is a need in terms of the confidence and skills to be able to respond appropriately. So I guess as a little plug, people can access the toolkit through the CIH website, and I would really encourage teams to use it collectively, not just individually, but it works really well when it becomes part of that team discussion, the supervision, and importantly, the organisational learning.
Yeah, and in preparation for this podcast, I was just going through the toolkit just to remind myself of everything that it includes, and there really is a lot of good stuff there. So yeah, just to echo what you were saying, Julie, to everyone listening, do take a look at the toolkit and all the resources within it, and see how you can use it within your organisation. Because as I say, I think it is a genuinely valuable resource. But as we've been saying, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week. So just as a question to each of you, what one tip would you give to those listening to help boost or maintain their mental health? So I'm not sure which one of you wants to take that one on first. Niamh, yeah.
So I think if I had to give one tip, it would be not expecting yourself to be on top form all the time. So some days you'll be really productive and patient and on top of everything, and then the other day you might walk into a room and not know why. And I think that's normal and that's okay. So I think we put ourselves under a lot of pressure to always be steady and capable and ready to do your job. But sometimes you just need to slow things down a wee bit and you need to take a breather instead of trying to power through. So one thing that I've done since I moved to Tuath is accepting that there is an end to the day, because this job is so busy and so demanding and there'll always be something to worry about. But I've really tried to embed that into the way that I do my job, is to realise that sometimes that's a tomorrow problem. So my tip would be just be kinder to yourself, accept that not every day you're going to be 10 out of 10 and that sometimes enough is just enough.
And I suppose for me, the one piece of advice I could give to anybody working in housing is to celebrate the small wins, because you can get to the end of the day, and I do this most days, you get to the end of the day and you only think about the challenges, but there's always something good that's happened that day, whether it be, you know, somebody got the keys to their home, which is a big celebration, or just somebody opened the door to you that hasn't been engaging. And you know, if you can get into the way of even writing those down, it just reminds you why you do the job that you do. And a piece of advice that always sticks out to me that a manager once gave, and it's that you can do a fantastic job in 37 hours a week. Nobody expects you to do any more than that. That
Yeah.
would be my advice.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. And Julie?
Yeah, if there was one tip, it would be this: don't do it alone. I think it's important to make time to check in with yourself honestly, to ask yourself not just, am I coping with this, but what do I need to do right now? So small acts of self-care and asking for support can really make a huge difference. I think certainly whether that's checking in with a colleague or talking to a friend, or even just taking that moment to pause, to acknowledge how you're feeling. And there's a feelings wheel within the toolkit, which is interesting to have a look at if you've never done that before. Certainly, I think in busy roles, especially in housing, it's quite easy to keep going without pausing. And similar to what Niamh and Linzi have said, there are only a certain amount of work hours in the day, and we all in very, very many professions do much more than that. But even those small actions, so taking a proper break, setting some boundaries, or just even having a conversation, can make a real difference. So importantly for me, and this is the essence of the campaign, I guess, if you are struggling, reaching out is a sign of strength and not weakness. And we all need support at times. That may come in different guises, but importantly, creating that culture where that's normal. And that is a key element of the campaign.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a great point to end it on. The whole point about yeah, reaching out is a sign of strength, not of weakness. I think that's very powerful. But yeah, I think with that we should probably draw this session or this podcast to a close. I'd just like to thank you all for taking the time to discuss this. I mean, it's a very important topic, I think, right now with all the pressures that housing professionals, wherever they're working, are facing currently. And I appreciate as well, Linzi and Niamh, you sharing some of like the really kind of human stories about kind of the things you've experienced during your careers. I think everyone listening to the podcast would appreciate you kind of sharing those insights. So yeah, again, a big thank you all for taking part in this session, or this podcast rather. And thanks to everyone listening in, and do be sure as well to tune into our next podcast, which will be uploaded to the website and our YouTube channel. So that's it from me, and that's it for another episode of the CAH podcast.